Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our session about greening governments, UN and other public sector organizations leading by example. My name is Fohgrub. I have the pleasure to welcome in a second our moderator, but I also have the pleasure on behalf of the organizers, which are the Greening Government Initiative, the Sustainable UN Initiative run by the United Nations Environment Programme, and the organization I'm representing, the Global Platform for Action for Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings, hosted at UNEP, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. So a lot of organizations, a lot of names already in my first sentence, and I have the pleasure to open the session today. And wish you all a very good afternoon and a good morning to the US and in Canada. We were able to actually gain one of the most pleasant moderator I can imagine to the session. He has served in various capacities within his government, the Netherlands. He's now the climate envoy since summer of the Netherlands. And I had the pleasure to work with him when he was the senior advisor with the High Commissioner on Refugees in Geneva the last couple of years. And it gives me a great pleasure to introduce my friend Jaime, Prince Jaime de Bourbon de Parme. Jaime, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. It's great to be here with all of you here in Glasgow and all of you out there online. And I know you're feeling with us, you're with us to make an impact globally. Now here in Glasgow, we have the formal negotiations on mitigation, on adaptation, and on Article 6, which is the rule book on how to move forward as a global community on our plans on climate action. But next to the formal negotiations, which all governments have to agree with each other, we also have the alliances of the willing, those who want to move forward faster on very specific topics. We have alliances on forests, we have alliances on methane, we have alliances of phasing out coal, many alliances. And one of the alliances today, which we're discussing here, is leading by example, greening governments and the UN and public sector organizations. So welcome to this session. And what we notice as well, and Thomas and I were scheming about this, is that a lot of people have the role model effect. So what we notice with, say, putting solar panels on your roofs, when you ask people why they do it, the actual reason is, well, my neighbors did it, so I want to do it as well. So we hope with this session that governments and UN agencies will feel, well, if so many agencies are doing it already, we should move as well. So that's the goal of this session. Let me quickly introduce who is on the panel. Some are physically with us and some are not physically. But next to me, I have got Pius. And Pius comes from Uganda. And he's not on the formal panel. But I made a promise when I came here to COP to include youth in dialogue. So to have youth wherever we can to be part of the dialogue, because they have a lot of expertise, they've got a big constituency, but they also have an intergenerational view on matters. So Pius, thank you for joining us. Pius is from Uganda. We met now several times. Thank you for being with us. And he won't be a formal panelist, but he will be a responder. So we'll have a touch and go back and forth to say, Pius, what do you think of these matters? Are we talking nonsense? Are we saying smart things? What do you think we should do? So we have this talk show sort of setting with Pius and myself. Now, who else is online? I would like to introduce Ligia Noronha, and she is the UN Assistant Secretary General, that is super high level in the UN, and head of the UNEP office in New York City. And she runs one of the programs that is relevant to this session called Greening the Blue. How do we green the blue UN?
Ligia is not there, so let's move to the next.
And yes, but she's joining us soon. She has connection problems, so she doesn't know that we've really promoted her here in this stand, but she'll guess it very soon. Second is Andrew Mayock, and he's the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer for the United States government. Welcome, Andrew, to our session. And he leads an initiative relevant to this session called Greening Government Initiative. And the US has started it together with Canada, and the Netherlands, whom I represent here at COP, has just joined this initiative as well. And third, I would like to reintroduce the one who opened this session, Thomas Fohgrub, Global Platform for Action on Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings. He's trying to get clean and safe energy in the toughest places in this world, deep in the field of displacement setting, refugees and others out there. And fourth, related to that, our great colleagues, Amy Pope, Deputy Director General for Management and Reform at the International Organization for Migration, IOM. And she works also how to get energy in displacement settings. So welcome speakers to this session. And for you all listening here, we've got a couple of things on the agenda. First, we're going to have a round of questions around the overview of the challenges. So what are the challenges to green your organizations? And the potential of buying power of governments is massive. The potential buying power of the UN is massive. So if you do that in the right way, you can have an impact and reach our climate goals, or at least contribute to them. So the first one is the challenges. Why aren't we reaching them, or are we reaching, and can we overcome these challenges? And some of us will talk about the global perspective, the other one more regional from a humanitarian or implementation perspective, and others more from a governmental perspective. The second round will be about potential solutions. Third round will be questions from the floor, so all of you here, but also from you online, please send in your questions. I'll have a green light here that indicates there's a question, and you can actually, by voice, intervene and ask a question to us. And then we have a last round, a quick call for action by the panelists. Now, let me then formally start. I've got a couple of questions, and I know that Ligia is not online, and whenever she's online, I'll get a quick call from the UN organizers here. So let me quickly go to part one, overview of the challenges. And maybe I'll start with you, Thomas. And Thomas, from a regional humanitarian perspective, and you know, you're leading an energy community. So what is the magnitude of what is the problem? I mean, why does UN have to green? I mean, they're doing a lot of good in the world. What is their impact on climate?
Thank you very much. You won't be surprised, I've got a slide, one slide only. Can we pull this, how do we see this? Yeah, okay, perfect. We skipped that one. So when we talk about energy in displacement settings, and displacement, for those who are not familiar with this term, is about where people are displaced, meaning, for example, refugees or internally displaced people. But when we talk about displacement settings, we always also talk about the host community and the host region that is so kind to offer this host situation to the population. And when we look at the energy situation, we're basically talking about two things here. One is, and I've got a couple of pictures here that illustrates what we're talking about. The first one is that. It's a cooking situation. And we know that roughly 80% of refugees living in camp situations cook with firewood on stoves like this, on open fires like this. That causes an enormous amount of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as smoke coming with health and other respiratory diseases. There's some party over there. We should invite them as well. I hope the sound is still good enough. And on the other hand, we are talking about these machineries here, generators. These are fossil fuel, diesel or petrol powered generators. Some of them are really old and crappy. Some of them are as big as a container that you may know. Some of them are relatively small, and in total we've done a survey the other day, or in the past half a year, we figured out that the UN, 6 organizations of the UN plus the International Committee of the Red Cross is running 11,400 generaters every day. 11,400. That leads to roughly 200 million expenditures in terms of diesel. And we all think in this sector, this needs to stop. We need to stop burning money because we know solar is actually way cheaper. And I think we can go within the next discussions a little bit more deeper into the challenges and also potential solutions. However, what we don't see in these two pictures is the lack of electricity for the people. And at very best, unfortunately, they have this. They have a solar lantern, a little lamp that offers a little bit of light in the night. And there's no electricity whatsoever. 90% of the people living in these situations don't have access to electricity. And imagine we don't have access to electricity, the meeting would stop in the next second. So electricity means life, means jobs, means decent education services, and all of this. So this is really the magnitude of challenges we have in front of us. Back to you, Jaime.
No, thank you very much. And I just heard that the Ligia of UNEP is having troubles connecting, but Isabella Marras is going to join in instead of her. Isabella, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Jaime, do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Hey, welcome to this group. Good having you at COP from a distance. Where are you calling from, Isabella?
I'm from Italy, but I'm joining from Geneva.
So welcome from Geneva. From a global perspective, what are the challenge opportunities does the UN system face in greening and operations? So why greening the blue?
Let me give you some general idea of what we do, and then I go into the challenges. So the UN has to go green just because we bring values, SDGs and development and peace and humanitarian aid to over 193 countries and territories all around the world. There is no way we can reach our mission if we don't walk the talk, as well as running our projects, just as Thomas was saying. Because of that understanding, in 2019, the UN endorsed at the highest level a strategy for sustainability management in the UN system that takes us between 2020 and 2030 with quite ambitious goals related to greenhouse gas emissions, water waste, pollution, biodiversity, and also looks at how we manage our operations in line with the goals, with the environmental, in particular, aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. On climate, the strategy sets quite a commitment for the UN system. We committed to align our operations with the scenario that to limit the global warming by 1.5 degrees. For our operations, that means, like for many others, 45% emission reductions with baseline 2010 until 2030. And for our system, that is a very important steer in business model. Yeah, as you know, UN travels, delivers food, delivers blankets and aid, and all these activities need to be done by also incorporating our environmental impacts. Because of COVID, last year we did reduce a lot our emissions, but not even COVID allowed us to go close to our goals. We really need to do business differently. So that's why we need to go green. And the main challenges that we face along the way with this trajectory are, number one, key cultural and institutional challenges. Our business processes, our budgetary system is made every year. That doesn't allow savings that have, a long-term perspective in mind. Environment is still not always integrated in how we design our programs and our decisions. And also we have a major challenge in the fact that we need to develop different solutions depending on the countries where we are. There is not one size fits all for us. Another challenge is clearly related to resources and the redirection of resources also to make sure our operations co-deliver environmental benefits. And in that sense, maybe we can be more clear in how going green delivers benefits to our host countries. because that's what it does. And we can bring examples, but I don't think we have a lot of time. And then the third challenge that we face in many locations is access to technologies and know-how. Not every UN staff in every part of the world has, familiarity with the best technologies and the best solutions for their location in terms of environmental impacts. So these are three major challenges that we face, but we are working on it.
No, that sounds really, really interesting, Isabella. And just tell us, how many people are actually serving? I mean, IOM is big, it's necessary. How many people are in need, and are you helping? Because then maybe people have an idea of the scale of your operations. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, the Greening the Blue report of this year, for instance, touches over 50 UN entities, programs, UNICEF, UNESCO, and all UN entities that you can think of, and 315,000 people. That includes the peacekeepers, the military personnel, and the police personnel, and all the UN personnel around the world. Our impact is 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent, and that corresponds to about 5 tons CO2 emissions equivalent per capita for last year. But as I said, we reduced emissions a lot.
No, it's huge, and unfortunately, I mean, for people don't know, the UN is not a luxury. It's there because, say, UNHCR is if you look at UNHCR, which I know, it's serving 80 million people that are forcibly displaced. IOM is serving a big part of those people and beyond, because there's beyond refugees many migrants around the world that need support. We've got the ICRC, the Red Cross, working in conflict areas. There's many conflict, and so all these people need to be able to fly, to drive, to have housing, to have heating if they're in cold areas, or air conditioning. They need to get food supplies, plastic packaging. All that is being done, and now what we're discussing is, while they're doing good for humanity on one hand, how can they also step up and do it with the least possible impact on the environment and climate? So thank you very much for that overview. And quickly, to look at what Thomas says, and then I'll ask Pius for a quick reaction. What are you hearing? Are you being shocked by this? What is your ideas? Because we're talking about what is the challenge right now. You said, Thomas, 90% of the refugees don't have access, or the people in concern don't have access to electricity. They have to cut wood to be able to survive. Gender-based violence, people going in and out to get food and water. You said 11,000 generators being run to be able to run these operations. That's massive. And long supply chain of trucks having to go into the middle of nowhere to be able to run these generators. And we can resolve that by having clean tech, clean energy, at least for part of it, to generate electricity. We'll go to the solutions later, Thomas. But Pius, what are you hearing?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm hearing a lot of, the challenges and how to go about them. And I'll speak in the perspective of where I come from, because I come from Uganda. And Uganda has, it's a host of, one of the biggest refugee camps in there. And all the challenges here are vivid. But also, looking at the challenges, we also looking at Uganda as a country becoming a host of its own people who are climate refugees because of the climate change. And so when you look at all this, the climate crisis that is really, affecting us and all that, we're looking at even us hosting our own people as climate refugees, where they're losing their property, they're losing all their sheep and animals and food. And so the challenges are really vivid, and so the greening, or the transition to the greening, is really vivid, and I commend all the partners, stakeholders, to really go forward to it.
Thank you, Pius. So indeed, has to go hand in hand. You can't be saving one thing and create another problem parallel to what you're doing. So a unified solution. So the next on the panel is IOM, the International Organization for Migration, Amy Pope, the DG of IOM. And can you give us more of a regional perspective? What are the challenges to work in very remote locations?
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation to this event. It's an incredibly important one. And a special shout out to my good friend, Andrew Mayock, with whom I worked very closely in the US government before joining the International Organization for Migration as the Deputy Director General for Migration and for Management Reform. So a couple of things. This is an incredibly timely conversation. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, we are dealing directly with some of the issues that were just raised. What is the impact of climate change on migration and displacement? And what we are seeing is an increasing impact in so many regions around the world, and a direct relationship between climate, displacement, and the humanitarian assistance that we provide. We're an intergovernmental organization. We work directly with our member states, and our primary goal is to make sure that migration is a choice and that it's not a necessity. But we're also an incredibly large humanitarian actor, and we're directly implementing in the field in contexts that are often challenging to reach, often challenging in terms of providing assistance, and often in conflict or other technically very difficult places. And so we have this tension even in our own organization between addressing the migrants who are displaced often by climate change, but then making sure that our own efforts are not actually contributing to the problem. And frankly, it's not always easy to reconcile. And to kind of frame some of the challenges, because I think we need to take these on collectively if we're going to be able to confront them. Some of them are just logistical. How do we transport fuel, for example? Some of them are based on infrastructure. How do we get the materials that we need when we don't have roads that we could use? There's no grid. Some of them are related to security. How do we ensure that our people and the people that we're serving are safe when we're acting in a disaster zone or a conflict zone? We know, and we have taken very seriously, that the UN humanitarian organizations have the largest operational environmental footprint in the UN system after the UN peacekeepers. And we take very, very seriously our obligation that we need to focus not just on our immediate near-term response in terms of the migrants that we're serving, but to think through how our actions are going to impact migration in the future. So there are a couple of things that we are working on. One is greening our own infrastructure. We have offices around the world. We have about 24,000 people who are working. We're serving over 37 million in our crisis response actions. So how can we look at our own infrastructure and ensure that we are using energy efficient options where possible? We're looking at using solar technologies. It's powering our water supply or street lights, both in terms of our own operations, but also in terms of our engagement with the communities we serve. And then doing things like producing biogas to provide clean cooking fuel to displaced people. We're doing this in South Sudan, Nigeria, Bangladesh. We're trying it out. We are not doing it across the board, but we're trying to capture the successes and modify and learn lessons so that we can impose the practices around the world. But I want to make sure we really understand what the challenges are, because until we can face these, I don't think we're going to make the kind of strides that we all need to make. And the first is funding. Now, the way, everybody I know is always concerned about funding, but a lot of the initial investments are quite expensive. And even though it will save us money in the long term, the way that organizations like IOM are funded is we get projects. The United States, for example, will agree to fund a project to provide support in Ethiopia. And they're not looking at the 2-year, 3-year, 4-year investment of resources. The project funding is for sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes even less. So when we're talking about short-term funding that is coming in under a year, it's difficult for us to make the kinds of initial upfront investments that are required for the more environmentally sustainable mechanisms of acting. Two, sometimes there are just insufficient clean alternatives in the markets and the places we're operating. And then finally, especially because we're working in some very remote locations, some very challenging locations, often we have limited technical capacity. And so integrating renewable energy in our work can be quite challenging. I mean, some places we work, we don't have even electricity or access to the internet on a regular basis. So we're talking about a level of sophistication, which sometimes makes it less attainable to achieve these goals. So we're going to move on to solutions next. So I'll leave the challenges there, but I do think it's really important that collectively we acknowledge that if we want to make a really meaningful difference here, we need to find a way to bridge some of these.
Thank you very much. We see that culture is one thing that people want to make the difference. So we see it, and they're willing to work differently to reach these things, the skills, the tech that is needed, and the funding structure, the systems that make it possible to make that change. Thank you very much. I quickly go to our next speaker, Andrew Mayock, the U.S. Federal Chief Sustainability Officer. Welcome. And you'll give the government perspective. So why need governments to make that shift?
Thank you, Jaime. Really appreciate you hosting this panel. Honored to be among so many great leaders and champions for climate. Also want to thank Pius for joining us today. Want to thank Ligia, Isabella, and UNEP for bringing this issue to the appropriately named venue of climate action. Very excited to talk about action today, and I would return the shout out to Amy. A big thanks to Amy for rejoining public service in the international sphere here and bringing her formidable talents to that. I'm really excited to be here today to introduce the Greening Government Initiative. And as a part of that, I also want to thank our co-founders, Canada, and in particular, Nick Zenos, Jane Keenan, and Beth Lavender from the Canadian government, and Hethel Jane and Alex D'Alessio from the US. Without their collective work and their leadership, I would not be here today sharing what I have the opportunity to share, so I'm grateful for that work. I also have a few slides that I hope could be put up, even though I won't be able to use the clicker there. If you can let me know when they're up.
It's still going up, maybe the...
Okay. And I'll dive into it as they come up. So as noted, I'm really pleased to be here today on behalf of the Canadian government and the US government to formally launch the Greening Government Initiative at this venue and to share with you that we have 36 countries plus our two founding countries that are formally committing today to work together to green our governments, to do exactly what the name of this panel is, to lead by example. So what does that mean? What is the Greening Government Initiative and how are we leading by example? And a few points to that. One is greening government is a way for national governments to better use the power of their footprint to accelerate their decarbonization transitions, and in doing so, address climate change head on, and also seize the opportunity by creating jobs in the clean energy economy. And what we came to understand as we're working individually, that we can do more together. We can do more, we can do it faster, and we can do it more efficiently. So through the Greening Government Initiative, we hope to, and we will be working with each other for this slide on issues like more renewables to reach that carbon-free energy future that we need to get to accelerate our adoption of zero-emission vehicles, and to change fundamental things like our procurement systems in order to decarbonize our work and be better environmental stewards of that work. Now, how did this come about? This effort was born of bilateral cooperation between the US and Canada. And back in 2015, under President Obama's leadership, the US launched a leading sustainability strategy. Canada saw that strategy, picked up the phone, and asked, how might we do that? And Canada has been off and running and leading ever since. And 6 years later, when President Biden came into office, we returned that call to the Canadians and said, tell us about your work and your progress. And since then, We've also seen our various agencies and our ministries connect and cooperate, including our primary procurement agencies, for example, our postal organizations and our defense agencies, connect and collaborate on how we're working individually and together to address climate change and to accelerate our work. And so soon after this bilateral reconnection, we said to ourselves, this is good. We need to broaden the circle. We're going to learn more, and we have lots of lessons to share ourselves. So that takes us to our next slide to tell you a little bit about what is it? What is the work that we're doing individually and seeking to accomplish together? So we have a snapshot of the U.S. government federal sustainability plan. And it basically has the core pillars here of moving U.S. government operations to 100% carbon-free electricity, to transition our federal fleet of vehicles, which numbers over 600,000 vehicles, from a current 1% zero-emission vehicles to 100% zero-emission vehicles. To do the same kind of deep decarbonization and strong environmental stewardship work in other pillars of the federal footprint, including the buildings, waste, water, to move out with very highly ambitious and achievable goals and go deliver on those goals across these major areas. To do that with the enabling features on the right side of this slide is to make sure that we do it by engaging all of our federal government employees in this work, by integrating and advancing environmental justice and equity through the work that we do, and by accelerating that work and leveraging that work through public-private partnerships. So that's a snapshot of our plan when you say, what is this? What is this about? And we had the opportunity, as we've been getting the Greening Government Initiative off the ground, to hear from countries like Germany, Morocco, Sweden, Canada, to come together and to share how they're organized themselves, what kind of progress they've made, what kind of procurement rules have changed. And so, building these opportunities for deep cooperation and lessons learned is where we are right now and where we're headed. And then here's a slide that shows where we are today and the 39 countries that have joined us. This is 39 and growing. So we look forward to more, including Pius. We'd love to have Uganda join the group. And again, I think the power of this work is threefold as I close out here, that we should all keep in mind as we think about this. One is that the national government operations, the national operational footprint, is often the largest employer, the largest real estate holder, the largest vehicle operator, as I mentioned. And so the lead by example effect here is extraordinary. And when we lean into that, we can show others it can be done, and others will follow. And I think that's I'll end right there, is that the power of that effect. And we know when we look across each of our government counterparts, that's very much the same government to government, nation to nation. And so we look forward to doing that from our country. We look forward to working with others together, and we look forward to sharing those lessons here in the future.
And just for Pius's lobbying towards his government, are there other African nations in this, or should Uganda be the first?
There are, and I can come back with a full list, but we do have others, such as Ethiopia have joined. I believe Morocco is in, yes, Malawi. But Uganda would be an early mover when it comes to the continent of Africa, and we would love to have Uganda join us.
So what we'll do, Pius, we'll empower you with the mandate of all this list of embassies in Uganda to have a dialogue with government to green Uganda. You'll be a star there. Very good. Now, we went from some of the challenges that we had, but also actually we started into the solution sphere. And I have one question to each of the panelists: is what are the ways to accelerate progress to attain net zero 2050, and how do you monitor the progress? And maybe first to Isabella, UNEP. You're on mute still, maybe on our side. Let me check. Maybe the organizers can check. Yeah.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to use data. So is it possible, Thomas, to show the slides with the results of the Greening the Blue report?
We're going to put up the slides. Yeah.
Very simple. Because, you know, we learned a lot. We knew it before, but we learned a lot this year because of this terrible pandemic. The UN has had to work in a very different way. And that sort of shifted the balance of our emissions in a way that I personally find very, very interesting. So if you put the data up, you will see that, I don't see it, but I know it by heart.
We have to be a bit patient, but continue.
I can continue because I can tell you that last year we reported emissions for the UN system for 2019, a very normal year. Our emissions were 2 million tons CO2 equivalent for the same amount of people, the same, more or less, same number of agencies. This year, as I said before, we have 25% less of absolute emissions, right? It's 1.5 million. What changed a lot is the balance between travel, facilities, and other sources. Travel for us is the commercial travel, the emissions of our staff. Other sources was what Amy was mentioning, you know, transporting things. And then facilities is our assets, yeah? Last year, the proportion was more or less 45% travel by memory, 43% facilities, and 12% other. You know, that's the fuel and the ground transport.
Isabella, the slide is up, so we see the dashboard. We see the dashboard. Yeah.
This year, you can see in the slide that travel has reduced, not so much. Facilities bigger. And ground transport is more or less the same. I think the reason is that we never stopped, you know, refugee camps. Migrants didn't stop to go from one place to the other. You know, the real core of the UN presence on the ground, despite COVID, was there, yeah? So what we expect could help accelerate in next year is, number one, to learn from how we're working differently. You know, this event is a bit online, is a bit virtual, is for sure way less emissions than the previous COPs. So we need to rework travel patterns and really rethink how the UN delivers beyond the ground presence that is fundamental to our mandates, yeah? Second, we see now that with less travel, facilities have much more, you know, presence in the combination of sources. We need to think, do we need all these offices? Are they efficient? What type of energy we utilize to run these offices? Also, as Amy said, but also Andrew, you know, we are a very, if we look at all of us together as public organizations, we run a lot of procurement, we run a lot of buildings, and we need to ask ourselves, and these things are run on taxpayers' money, by the way. So we need to ask ourselves, how efficient are all these infrastructures that we use? In some cases, maybe not much can be done, but in others, I am sure we can find efficiencies using better technology and, as I say, passing you know, the energy more into renewables. The UN only uses 19% of only 90% of our electricity comes from renewables. I bet we can do better than this. And then procurement for us is fundamental. The UN buys 20 billion a year. That was 2020 data. Is this 20 billion utilized not only for the delivery on mandate, but for the support of our mandates in the countries? You know, as I said, we want social justice, we want fair labor conditions, we want disabilities inclusion, gender inclusion, environmental. We fight for these things. How is our procurement helping us reach these goals, especially in countries where we advise the country on the same issues?
Yeah.
So the procurement function can certainly be mobilized. And then for me, it's very important, and for us in Greening the Blue, we see is really important the issue of culture change and making sure that the 315,000 people that we measure the impact of are with us on the journey. Your question was also, I think, related to monitoring. And for monitoring, and you see it, we do it via the Greening the Blue, and we collect data from all the entities in the UN system on a year-to-year data, on a year-to-year basis. And we started to see some progress. That is all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, we see the monitor, and it's a very clear way of mapping out where you are. And I think all these UN staff can really see how an impact can be made and how much still needs to be done. So we're early on the curve. Amy, would you like to respond from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of thoughts here. We're slightly different than some of the UN organizations in that we're actually an implementer as opposed to operating in the Secretariat where we're convening. So just by the nature of the way we do business, we need to be in place and providing support to people on the move. But that doesn't mean that we can't actually find some real efficiencies and accelerate our progress. One of the key efficiencies we found is really effectively shortening the supply chain, right? 70% of our procurement is done locally. We're increasingly moving to logistics hubs where we're taking advantage of having a manufacturing base where we need the resources that are then going to go out to the field. The second is frankly money. I hate to go back there, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have government actors listening in and participating in the call. Our funders are primarily government actors. So there are two things that our member states can do to drive and accelerate action. One is to think about where there are opportunities to do multi-year funding and make really clear that they want to see that multi-year funding go into an initial investment that provides for environmental efficiencies down the road. We are going to be responsive to our member states, and we've done that on things like preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. We'll do it here. And so getting that demand signal and then having the resourcing to do it is extremely important. And then finally, there's a lot of work to be done here around innovative financing. We don't have a long history of working with the private sector. There's a lot of room here because much of the innovation is happening in the private sector. And so figuring out how to capitalize on the knowledge, the experience, the financing streams of our development partners, and engaging with the private sector in partnerships that, you know, it's a bit of a tricky business because of the way the UN is structured and our immunity status, but that doesn't mean it's insurmountable. So what are the institutional conditions that we can build across the UN that allows us to really exploit and capitalize on the relationship with the private sector where they've really become very innovative?
No, thank you very much. It rings so true. I've seen it working in the UN in the past as well, exactly these challenges, and they need to be taken up. And these are systemic challenges. These are not things that are easily resolved. So also on the donor side, you see that the money for humanitarian organizations come from a humanitarian budget, and that is to save lives now, and it's not to invest into the future. But again, investing now is saving lives in the future. So that's a challenge and a dialogue that needs to be held very dearly also for the climate impact. Thomas, you know everything about this. So the question now to you, how do we accelerate and how do we monitor progress?
I'd actually like to come back to Amy's last point about innovation. When we talk about replacing a diesel generator, for example, there are two sides of sort of the innovation perspective. There's one, which is the technology itself, and that's easy, that's done, that's off the shelf. We have the technology, we have the solar systems, we have ready-made container solutions that can be deployed to anywhere in the world and could be put up in 3 hours and you have a little power station. But these systems are usually designed in a way, or the companies are operating in a way, they sell these solar container solutions. And what we've developed in the last 2 years, we've developed a leasing and a renting model for organizations like IOM, like UNEP and the others, to go to basically use what they spend now on diesel and ideally less for this new renting of a solar system, solar container solution. However, now the tricky bit starts, because we heard also from Amy, we're talking about annual funding cycles. So these organizations, they cannot agree to a, for example, or it's difficult for them to agree to a 5 or 10-year leasing or renting model. So we, in the next phase of this journey here, we're talking about an innovative finance solution which basically de-risks the capital or the investment of the private company if we really have to terminate this contract earlier. So that is the tricky bit. So it's not only about technology as such. Technology is there. Technology is not a problem. Also it's about finding the right finance model and the right delivery model to actually scale this up.
Now, and one of the innovations that I really like is the GPA. It's a human organization or innovation, set up as a non-threatening kind of binding platform for all UN agencies to come together and humanitarian agencies to figure this out together, and not everyone by themselves. Thank you, Thomas. And now to you, Andrew. You said it's to get the government future-proof, and it's about creating jobs. And what is your answer to accelerating progress and how to monitor that progress?
Thank you, Jaime. I'd cite a few key things and say a quick word about each of them. I think it's important to get in line policy, planning, people, and performance. And on each of those things, when it comes to policy, it's really important to send a strong signal. And I've shared that in the presentation, in that we now have this goal for 100% zero-emission federal fleet, 600,000 vehicles, et cetera. So sending that strong policy signal so it's clear to the actors where we're headed. Planning, got to have a plan around an ambition like that. So putting together a plan and refining it and getting it done. Three, that as to the people, got to get the people in place to deliver. Sometimes it's bringing in new people, sometimes that's shifting others. And then performance, strong believers here of what gets measured gets done. And we make that very transparent for our plan. If you go to sustainability.gov, you can see how the U.S. federal government is doing across a number of these measures, and we keep that up, and we update that at least annually. So I would point to that. And I think when you do those things, big things can happen. And one thing I would cite is our Department of Defense is currently building over 600 megawatts of solar power in California. On part of an Air Force base. That's going to bring a ton of clean electricity into the system, and they're doing it because they got the signal, they have the footprint of the federal government to use, and they're using public-private partnership with utilities to go deliver on that.
Now that's good news. And a really quick round to each of you, just really quickly, what is one big opportunity that is right there that you want to focus on next? Maybe quickly to Isabella.
Quickly, for me, we are all public sector organizations. We work in similar ways. Lots of what Andrew mentioned echoes what we do in Green in the Blue. So procurement is an area where we all work. In the UN, we have specific procurement rules that echo probably what happens in member states. A good collaboration could be in one of these areas to exchange, best practices and see how to ensure that environment is well integrated into the culture of procurers. It's not a matter of rules, it's a matter of what we prioritize there. It's not so much about changing the rules. And if you allow me, there is other areas in which, for instance, we have definitely made progress because we worked with other public sector organizations. We have a partnership with the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, with the staff of that agency in the SUN team, in the Green in the Blue group, and that helped tremendously. The two organizations understand how to mainstream governance, with the policy planning aspect that Andrew was mentioning, that is so important. We were able to help our organizations because we had this support from a member state. So these are two areas of collaboration that I think are important. Sorry, a last one. there is some areas in which UN entities are very different, but others in which we could do really well by working together with IOM and the team of Amy. We have done an extensive research on fleet and how to improve the fleet of UN organizations using IOM, but also UNHCR and other humanitarian organizations. The UN burns 350, let me check because it's huge for me, 350 million liters of fuel every year. In logistics, basically, and generators. So this is another area where we are all together, and maybe we can find efficiencies.
No, so the UN really needs to green. That's very, very clear. Then maybe Amy, what do you want to respond?
In the interest of being quick, I'm just going to foot stomp what Isabella just put down and point out that really it's in the collaboration. The costs, the innovation, everything else is just too hard for one organization to do on its own. The Clean Fleet project that she just mentioned is a great example where you pull together a couple of different agencies, you analyze the impact of ground transportation, and it drives recommendations and action. So that's critical.
Super. And Thomas?
Yeah, again, this legal framework, which I just mentioned, this is really open source. Everybody can use this. Everybody in the humanitarian system, in the UN, and beyond that. So, and this comes back to also Andrew's point about public-private partnerships. We have to do this together with the private sector. They have good solutions. Unfortunately, they don't speak the same language as sometimes we do in the UN or vice versa. So we have to have a little bit of a translation here, and that's, for example, our role within the GPA. But there are huge opportunities when we bring the private sector in. They would invest in areas in this world which nobody else would go apart from the humanitarian partners. So this is very crucial. This is how we can build a little energy ecosystem through a model like this.
Now, before I go to Andrew, already a warning to this crowd here, and we're ready for questions very soon. So think of questions you have for the panel, and what you do is you press the button. I'll get a list here, and then I'll give the number, and then you can ask a question in a minute. And those online, there's also a way online to ask question, to ask permission to speak, and that will be available soon. But Andrew, quickly to you, what do you see as a big opportunity going forward right now?
Yeah, I would align myself with my fellow panelists here today and say, doing two things. One, doing what we're doing here, what we're modeling through this conversation is coming together, collaborating, sharing, and acting from that sharing. And two, it speaks directly to the Greening Government initiative that we're announcing today, doing that in the context of the governments that we have been working with and will continue to work with. I think one of the amazing opportunities about this moment that we're in, which is clearly a moment of crisis, but also clearly a moment where you find throughout the items that I was talking about whether it's carbon-free electricity, whether, as was just mentioned, fleets, the path forward is clear. There's great people acting and who have clear accomplishments, and the virtue of copying that and bringing those into your institution to go deliver in very similar ways, customized to your particular organization, is completely available. And so that goes, back to the collaboration of utilizing this as a true race to the top.
That's great. And now, questions can come in, so do press the buttons if you have specific questions. We also received some questions online. I see some questions coming in already. But before I get the floor, I'll give the floor to Pius. Pius, what are you hearing? What is your reflection there?
Yeah, I must commend all the speakers. But again, there's something that I'm not really seeing, and that is the inclusion. Because speaking about the Green Initiative, we're talking about where does this leave the youth? Because if it is inclusion, where are the youths in there? Where are the small island states? Or where are the least developing countries? Because in Uganda, I think a solar panel goes for almost $100. But again, a local person down there, earns $80 a year. So how is it going to be something that is going to be inclusive? Because if we're talking about green initiative for countries, how is this going to come to people? How is it going to be included? And also for the youth, because so many youths have, beautiful innovations, but they don't access to the fund. So I don't see the inclusion in here. And I must commend, maybe I should put it up to the private sectors to really do a lot in investing in the youths as well. Thank you.
So that's a clear question, and maybe some before we go to the floor, and the questions are coming in already. Maybe a quick response. How do you include youth in your decision making, and how do you make sure that you use your purchasing power for those people of concern? And maybe that question goes to Amy. How does IOM deal with this? We can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute, or maybe the organization.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry about that. So a couple of key things. One is actually, as we see with many of the real innovations of the moment, youth is driving it. And it is the constant, it's the call for action, and it's the holding governments accountable in the political sense and the on the ground sense. So that's critical, and I don't think we should discount that. But there's also, I mean, for us, what we are trying to do is build some of these more environmentally sustainable solutions, immediate response. So, for example, we're using solar-powered systems as part of our non-food items that we distribute to migrants around the world, in South Sudan, in Nigeria, in Bangladesh, and Gaziantep. We are providing solar lanterns, solar radios. Some of that, frankly, is driven by the fact that there's not access to electricity in some of these places. And so the need on the ground is driving the investment. We're also looking at, can we use, and we are, in fact, using things like biogas from latrines to produce fuel, right? So there's this, there's an opportunity to, on a small scale, build it into the emergency assistance that we're providing on a regular basis.
So maybe Pius will come back to that in a second, but I'll go quickly to the tables here. There's quite a few questions. There's microphone 37, so you'll see your number in front of you. If you're 37, you can start and speak.
Hello, my name's John Wincott. I'm the chairman of Sustainable Scotland Network, which is the network of public bodies in Scotland. And what we find is it's difficult to break down these silos, and it's been talked about by the panelists today, both financial and organisational. My motto, my personal motto, is collaborate or fail. But achieving that collaboration is really difficult. So do the panelists have any thoughts on how to break down these barriers that exist between organisations locally?
Thank you very much. I'll take the next question, microphone number 23.
Hello. Yeah, Pius, thank you for the contribution. I'm actually from the fishing settlement in Nigeria. And from what Thomas said, your first slide, you said using the firewood, we call it firewood in Nigeria, it contributes to climate change. Now, most of the technology they are sending to Africa, I don't think it's coming to my native settlement. Okay, so I think more youth engagement should be encouraged. And I just want to project the Nigerian factor, because a lot has been said, and from the places that are covering, Nigeria is not among it. So I think we should do more of that. And most of us are energetic. We can take this message to the rural settlement. So please do more of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give maybe Andrew the answer of our Scottish friend who is hosting us here in Scotland, in Glasgow, during the COP, and then Thomas to respond.
Thank you, and I appreciate both questions. On the host question, I think it's incumbent on our work from the arena that I'm speaking from, is that we identify those pathways to break down those barriers to incent that engagement. We've been doing it in a couple ways as the Biden administration has got off the ground here over the past 10 months. One of those ways, which is pretty good example and a very concrete example, is that when it comes to government operations, the perspective I'm focused on, the U.S. federal government, which is 70 to 85% of the federal employees work outside of the capital of Washington, D.C. So we are throughout the country. We put together climate adaptation and resilience plans for each of the major agencies in the federal government, embedded in that plans, so we could deal with the shocks and the clear and present danger that climate is today, whether it was massive drought in the west of the United States, the incredible heat waves that occurred throughout 2021, Hurricane Ida that swept through the United States and brought lots of devastation, is how the federal employees that are on these front lines are engaged in their communities. And it became a core part of that plan to respond back to how we're delivering on that and to be transparent about it. And so the plans are public. The communities have the opportunity to see the plans. The agencies are engaged with the communities. And there's also other ways to get feedback to make sure that we're actually delivering and this is working.
There's no other way to get inclusive, but really bring everybody in. Thomas, you wanted to respond.
I think you give to give me.
Can we give number 50 the microphone, please?
Is it working? Yeah, perfect. On 2 points, on the youth topic, it is an extremely important topic for us. If you look at the general population living in displacement settings, most of them I would count on youth. So whenever we include these people in the development of energy programs, for example, we do include youth, and we also have some initiatives in the pipeline for which I can't mention yet, but we do look at this group of population. However, on Nigeria, Nigeria is actually will be our pilot country, where we, for the first time, bundle projects from 6 or 7 international organizations. So we looked at all their premises in Nigeria, especially in the north, in Mayock, and we realized they actually have their offices relatively close together. And for the first time, we will try to bundle these and have a joint procurement process to go green. So it is actually great, and it's also related to the conducive environment in Nigeria. So we are really looking forward to it. And if you're interested, I can give you more information.
Very good. We have quite a few questions going on, and we have a hard stop at 3 o'clock this time. So we have another 18 minutes to go. So I'll go really quickly to some more questions. So microphone 29, please.
Hi, my name is Shay, and I'm here on behalf of the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a program co-funded by the European Union, Spain, and Germany, and the regional chapter of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which has over 11,000 cities worldwide to have made commitments to climate action. And then in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have 268 cities who have done the same. And these cities have committed to certain things, and one of them is developing a sustainable energy access and climate action plan, and also working on project implementation from those plans. So I guess one of my questions, given that cities are often dealing with a lot of the topics that we mentioned today, that were brought up by many of the panelists, specifically migration and having an influx of millions, in some cases, residents coming into their cities. I'm wondering if you could talk about the role of cities. Maybe this is for Thomas, the role that cities could play, but also I have a question for Andrew, if there's time, if they're working at all with local governments or state-level governments in the Greening Government Initiative, I think it's called. Thank you.
Very good. I'll take one more question and then go to Thomas, Andrew, but we'll see what the second question actually delivers. Microphone 32, please. Very short. Number 32, please. Could you open the microphone? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm James. I think I'm going to ask quite a tricky question, but it's nice to have someone from the US government to do with it. It's sort of been touched upon lately in procurement and defense, but do we think it's actually possible to ever have a green government if we don't focus on greening defense? You know, the US military, obviously. if it was a country, it would be one of the largest polluters in the world. So it's a really hard question to answer, I know, but it's worth bringing to this panel.
Not at all. I had a whole discussion about that yesterday evening. So I think it is on the minds of many people. So maybe Thomas quickly, and then Andrew to respond.
Yes, thank you. On the role of cities, when we see pictures from refugee situations in television, we see often camps, right? This is the typical picture with the tents and all of this. The reality is the majority of refugees and internally displaced people are not living in tents. They live in rural areas or in cities. And we see cities are becoming more and more important in the future. We see all the slums that are facing exactly the same problems as you would see in a refugee setting. So we can't underestimate the role of the cities, and we are quite proud to work with the Convent of Mayors together on solving the solution because the challenges are very similar. So hopefully we can be aligned here.
Andrew, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. On the defense question, one is it's a great question. It's a critical question, and it's an accurate assessment of the footprint of that part of the federal government and the Department of Defense in the United States, as with our partners in Canada, account for a great majority when it comes to GHG emissions. And I think one of the things that you see, speaking for the United States and the Biden administration, is how important this issue is for the Biden administration. And when it comes to a whole of government effort, inclusive of the Department of Defense. And so you see Secretary Austin and the whole department responding to that through various actions such as the climate adaptation and resilience strategy that I just recently mentioned. The Department of Defense strategy happened to be the best among all agencies when it comes to that discipline and that issue. And two, when it comes to the issue of mitigation and how we lower emissions, the Department of Defense is also deeply aware of the national security issue that climate brings and acting on that in various ways. And one of the ways I would point out to you, two of the ways I would point out to you that the DoD is out in front, is one that they've recently issued and then now are working on engagement with their suppliers on GHG disclosures and how their suppliers manage their emissions as good partners with DoD. And so they're doing that on a bilateral basis, agency to suppliers as the largest purchasing agency in the federal government on that question. And then secondly, they're working with us at the center of government, the whole of government, on a similar issue in that we are building into the procurement rules disclosures, GHG disclosures mandatory for the major suppliers of the US government, and then adding science-based targets to those disclosures. And so DoD is at the table in this broader effort as well. So important issue, tough issue, we're working on it.
Thank you very much. I go to microphone 27.
Yes, I think it's on. Thank you very much, speakers, panelists. My name is Aniek, and I am the chair of the Dutch Youth Climate Movement and also part of the We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership that Pius is also part of. So good to see you there, Pius. I have a question for Andrew. I think it's good to see and good to recognize that governments, federal governments, have an exemplary role in their country, and good to see that the federal government in the US actually uses this role to show that they can be 100% green or use 100% green energy. But I'm wondering, maybe I missed it, but when are you planning, what year specifically, to be to get these goals? You might have said it, I missed it, but especially because we're on a limited time budget, I'm hoping that you as a federal government can show that this is something to be done in the next 5 years. If not, how are you really showing the rest of the country that this energy transition can be completed in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years?
Yeah, another excellent question. And, a key message of President Biden in Glasgow this week is that this is the decade of action, and this is the decade that we need to deliver on. It's not 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it's now. I'm happy to report that you will soon have and see the targets for government operations. We're about to release our federal sustainability plan in very short order. It will provide specific dates as to when we're seeking to go carbon-free electricity, when we're seeking to go zero-emission vehicles, and we think that will be a great inflection point and statement on doing what we're doing here today in the panel, leading by example. You be the judge when you see it. My hope is that you'll be able to see that in days, not weeks. But stay tuned for more detail.
So, but I'm not hearing any specific dates. I know that you will probably have to wait until the official report is out. Can you give us a ballpark? Is this going to be something that you can do in the next 5 years, or is it going to be something that can be done in the next 20 to 25 years?
Oh, I can't. I'm afraid I can't front run our federal sustainability plan and the dates that we have in it. But what I can say, to the comment I just made, and the message of the president is that this is a decade of action. We need to work now. So when you do see the details of the plan across carbon-free electricity, across vehicles, across buildings emissions, waste, and procurement, you'll see near-term concrete dates and actions.
Thank you very much. So cryptic, but I think the message is clear. Decade of action. Microphone 36.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Swanell from RAP. RAP's an international NGO working on food, plastics and textiles. And I've heard a great deal about how we might decarbonize and deal with energy. But given the fact that the food system is responsible for about 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, I'm just wondering where you see food fits in. All of the organizations that have spoken today are big procurers, deliverers of food. And I wonder how they're thinking, how do I decarbonize that, and how do I deal with the food waste, given that we waste around 1/3 of all the food that is produced on the planet? Thank you.
I would like to give that word to Isabella and maybe to Amy. Isabella?
Thank you. 2 points to the question. One relates again to procurement. The UN delivers food through, purchasing food services in our canteens, but also for refugee camps and for various situations. So the issues related to food waste, sourcing of the food, maybe local food, etc., they will all go back to the concept of integrating sustainability in procurement. And to echo what the youth representative said on your side, Jaime, it's also about inclusiveness and making sure that when we buy, we support local economies. There is some entities in our network, for instance, that have stopped purchasing large quantities of food to be then imported in countries from outside, and give funds to beneficiaries so that they can buy locally the food that they need. And a measure such as this reduces food waste because people buy the food they actually need for the family, and transportation related to food and supports the local economy.
Yeah,
I hope that answers.
No, thank you. And indeed, food is a big gap, I would say, in climate talks. We saw the Food Systems Summit didn't talk about climate, and in the climate talks don't talk about food. Well, we know that both impact each other. So that is something to put on the agenda and to give more attention to. I fully agree with that point of view. Quickly, Amy, would you like to quickly respond to this?
We at IOM actually don't distribute food. Our focus is on non-food items. But I would just note that the question of packaging is one that applies across the board, and using cash-based initiatives as a way to decrease waste is a key piece of it. I'm going to put in a plug, though, for having people like Isabella and Andrew. The importance of the role they're playing is they're sitting above and looking across the organization, and so they're looking for efficiencies, and they're not plugged into one particular agency or part of government. So if we're going to get there, we need to have people who are sitting at sort of 30,000 feet who are able to look across the enterprise and find ways that we are linking up these different departments and agencies.
Thank you very much. If anybody online wants to ask a question, I do have a little red button here that becomes green if there's an online question. We're open for questions from people listening in online, and then I'll take one of those questions. Waiting for that, if that happens or doesn't happen, the microphone goes to number 20.
Thank you so much for the speakers and panelists. I am Dr. Ahmed Mina, First Undersecretary for Research Planning and International Cooperation in Egypt. I think this initiative is a very ambitious initiative, but my question regarding the complement, how is the initiative complement with other initiatives on the ground now to avoid any duplication of efforts, and also regarding the what kind of supports and incentives to encourage the governments to join this initiative. Finally, to the regarding the key indicators, what are the indicators we will implement to measure the progress of our achievements in this regard. Thank you.
And it's great to have you with us on this panel, and maybe I'll ask Andrew, how do we avoid duplication in the field, and how do we get other countries on board? And Egypt is incredibly important for us. Next year, Egypt will host COP27, so we're at COP26 now. 27 is going to be Egypt. Egypt is going to focus on climate action very strongly, and I'm sure the government is looking for ways how to lead by example. So Andrew, the word is to you.
Well, I think a key way to avoid negative duplication is to do what we're doing here today and do what we're seeking to do through the Greening Government Initiative, and actually making these links, we'll be able to identify where there's duplication that we want to avoid. And per the theme of Greening Government Initiative, there's things that we want to actually duplicate. There's best practices that we want to seize and then incorporate. And just harkening back to the last questioner's comment about food, I think food's one of those areas where we have an opportunity to learn from each other and to really set the bar higher together.
So very good. So for all those countries listening, you can join these initiatives. The organizers are going to help you share best practices, etc. We have to quickly move towards wrapping up. A quick call to action for a couple of words by each panelist. Isabella, very quick. What is your call for others? You're doing yourself. What is your call for action? You're still muted.
Sorry, I'm so enthusiastic. The UN is a reflection of the member states that govern us and that define our trajectory. For us to be more sustainable, and not just greener, more sustainable at every level, we need the engagement of member states. We need to be told to do so, and we need to have the means and the support to do so, both at individual entities level. You heard lots of initiatives today, but also the coordination work that was mentioned before is something overlooked that actually takes time and takes also a lot of effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very short, Amy, because we're running in seconds. Go ahead.
I would say it's really the investments in our physical assets. We absolutely need them if we're going to do sort of the ultimate efficiencies along the road. We need to make these investments now. And so that's our member states, our partners, our donors, philanthropists. Everyone needs to get on board.
Very clear message. Andrew.
I would, in brief, say join us. We're at 39 countries today. There's no reason we can't be at 60 countries tomorrow and 100 countries in a couple months. So we look forward to broadening the circle here and delivering.
Let's go for 100. Pius, quick response from you.
Thank you so much. I think for us as youths, we're calling on a just transition. And a just transition means that we are all included in all the processes, from initiation to implementation. Because as Anik mentioned, We're Tomorrow Global Partnership is in over 10 countries. And you can imagine that it is a collection of these youths. So why does the public sector work with such young people such that this acceleration can go beyond their countries, because they're working in there and they need support. So I believe that we are today, tomorrow, and we are the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Pius, for joining us. Thomas, last word to you.
Also pull up the last slide. That would be good, because we have some information also in case you want to get in touch with us. I'd like to actually combine what Amy said and what Andrew said. First, Andrew's point was join us. Same goes for us. If you're interested in this energy for displacement topic, join us. Come to us, reach out to us. We will present the email in a second. And the other point is coming back to Amy's investment plea. Yes, invest in new technology, but don't forget the people. It is about bringing good to the people. It's about bringing electricity to people for their benefit and for the benefit of the planet.
Super. We switched off online already. Thank you for joining us, all of you here physically in the room. And if people can still hear us online, thank you for joining us as well. And we wish you a very good COP. We're going to make the best out of it. And Pius, again, great being with us. Ciao.
Thank you.